Well, with this attack, the Taliban has well and truly launched its summer offensive. But could it really wrestle control from the Afghanistan security forces? Well, joining me to answer that question is Marco Vicenzino, the Director of Global Strategy Project, a geopolitical risk analyst. Marco has also covered Afghanistan extensively for years and visited the country several times. Thank you for joining me. So, Marco, at the end of last year, after I think it's 13 years, foreign forces, or most of them, left Afghanistan, and it was up to the Afghanistan forces to manage themselves. Sure. How are they doing? They're not doing that well, are they?
Struggling. I mean, at its height, the international presence, which was largely a NATO presence, had about 150,000 troops with the best military hardware. Now, what's left in Afghanistan is about 350,000 fairly poorly equipped troops in the country. They're lacking is the air support that they enjoyed during the time of the international presence. They had top military hardware, so it was the heavy weaponry, and also logistical support. So once you lack that, that obviously is going to, your effectiveness is reduced. So in that sense, yes, man, they're struggling. But also it's important for one thing, is not just to count on the future of Afghanistan's success as being purely military. You also have to look at it in terms of introducing real reform. It's anti-corruption. What I mean by that is the fact that even if you win on the ground, you're going to lose minds and hearts in the country if ordinary Afghans don't see a reduction, a dramatic reduction in that corruption, and it has its impact politically. For example, in 2014, you had over 6 months of a presidential election, which was complete uncertainty. There was claims of corruption. People lost trust in the government. The government lost a lot of credibility. And that 6-month period also impacted the country economically. In terms of the military, loss of focus. So the government was already, the Taliban were making advances. And also on the diplomatic front, when foreigners see all this going on and they see that level of corruption, they're going to be very reluctant to give aid.
But you say diplomacy. I mean, isn't it time now that the Taliban actually starts talking and communicating with the government in Kabul? I mean, does it not need to go in that direction, into a more diplomatic?
Negotiations have been going on for several years, and it's been a stop and go, on and off. It's generally accepted that the conflict in Afghanistan can only have a political solution. You cannot have a military solution. That's the mindset, generally speaking. Even President Ghani in 2014, once he became president, also said that we need a peaceful resolution to this. But the fact is that the negotiations that have taken place over the years haven't really borne fruit. There's even been a point whereby the Taliban were given a political office in Qatar to sort of push the process forward. And also there was an exchange of Taliban prisoners to try to build trust. And all these confidence-building measures until now have not really borne fruit. And another thing is the fact is that the Taliban in recent months have been making military advances. And the result of that is that they really have no incentive to want to negotiate at this stage. So what they're trying to do is strengthen their position as much as possible so that if eventually there are negotiations in the future, they're going to be negotiating from a position of strength.
OK, so let's go back to what happened this morning. It was a very deliberate attack at a very deliberate time, wasn't it? It was a political move from the Taliban.
Huge symbolism. It's the time and the place. The time was when the parliament, the place being the parliament being the center of power in the country. The time is when they're considering whether or not to vote for the new defense minister. So it's the person who's going to be in charge of security, and the center is where where political power resides, in the parliament. So in that sense, they proved that from their perspective, they can hit whenever they want, wherever they want, whenever they want. So you can say, in a certain sense, it was an operational defeat for the Taliban, but you can say it was a propaganda victory. Because if you look actually what happened, credit has to be given to the Afghan security forces that they were able to, within 1 hour, neutralize the situation. But the question remains is that the suicide bomber in the car was able to penetrate and get close to the parliament, and that leaves an intelligence gap that what needs to be resolved over time. So in this sense, yes, they've gained headlines, hence that propaganda victory. They're dominating headlines today. They were defeated in the attempt. No MPs were killed, but they made a huge statement.
Marco Vicenzino, thank you very much indeed for joining me.